Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Bridget Nelson. On this episode, Mike Briggs talks about the recent USDA Cattle on Feed report. Jim Specht explains why planting soybeans early is critical to maximizing yield. Roger Berry discusses Nebraska's progress with ethanol. And Steffen Mueller explains how ethanol is improving air emissions in both the U.S. and foreign countries. Mike Briggs is our cattle market analyst this week. On April 20th, the USDA released its April Cattle on Feed report. According to the report, the United States cattle on feed totaled 11.7 million head on April 1st. This month's inventory was 7% above last year's total and is the second highest April 1st inventory since 1996. We talked with Mike Tuesday morning about cattle market prices, the current status of demand and supply levels, and the increase in inventory, but began by looking at the USDA Cattle on Feed report.
April Cattle on Feed report was basically neutral. Some people call it a little bit bearish. You had a big cattle on feed number. With cattle on feed reports, it's about how do expectations match up against the actual numbers or numbers against expectations, and it was pretty much flat. You had a decent marketing number with one less slaughter day, and you had placements that were down from last year, which was probably a good thing, or we would have had an even bigger cattle on feed number. I think for the most part, it just really didn't mean very much. What the market got out of that is we've had a higher board this week because we didn't exceed expectations and have worse numbers. So I think we've kind of put a bottom in this market for a little bit. I think we're going to be okay. We should be uptrending into probably Memorial Day like we usually are.
According to the report, placements in feedlots during the month of March totaled 1.92 million head, 9% below 2017. Net placements were 1.85 million head. We further asked Mike about the current cattle market prices.
Current prices are interesting. A couple weeks ago, this cattle tsunami we talked about last time, the market basically acted like it was here. When I say the market, the futures market acted like it was here. And we ended up having to sell fat cattle way cheaper than we ever should have because demand is good. And as I keep saying, we're coming into our best demand period of the year. And this thing got way out of whack, the CME, and the fact that they don't want to self-govern or self-regulate themselves and keep a lid on the position sizes of these funds. Because when these funds make a decision that, well, there's a cattle tsunami coming, we're going to beat the board up, there never was. It hasn't happened yet. I don't think the big supply of cattle is even coming until July and August. So right now, it should be good. So I think what those funds have done to us, they took away our marketing period where we were short on numbers and we didn't get the prices we should have gotten. They've beat this thing up so bad that we took lower prices than we should have had to. Now the good thing is I think we've put in a bottom for a little while. These prices are going to come back. We're going to be okay. I think cattle feeders are going to be profitable. We're not going to make the money we should have made. The packer's just been scooping it in with both hands. Now his margins got adjusted a little bit last week. I think maybe we're going to get a little take back a little bit of that here for the next couple of 3 weeks. You know, but once again, I say this every year, but once you get through Memorial Day, it starts to get to be pretty tough sledding. And I think as you get into June, your supplies of market-ready cattle are going to build right about the time you start to lose your demand. So I think that we could struggle there a little bit in that July-August time frame. But right now, I think we're good. I think we're going to end up with live cattle prices back here in the mid-20s. Maybe we have a shot at 130 if we can really see some good demand. And what we need to see is no more nor'easters or no more bad weather in the east where the population centers are, so we can start picking up some demand. Hopefully there's a little pent-up demand there so we can get a real quick boost, and that'll punch our prices up to where we'd like to have them be.
When it comes to supply, Mike believes that late summer may be a bit of a struggle.
Not right now. I do not think supply is going to be an issue until we get later in the summer. You get past the 4th of July, and I think it could get really bad. When I say really bad, I'm talking about back down to that $1.05 range in the worst. And that is, some of that's predicated on how much demand do you actually lose. Maybe we don't lose any demand. How big are the cattle? How many extra pounds of meat are we putting on the market? Last year we had a big glob of cattle and we didn't really put hardly any extra pounds on the market because we were marketing them. Now everybody, and when I say everybody, cattle feeders know that big supply is out there. So we're going to market cattle pretty readily, especially if you see this market increase. People are going to pull cattle forward. Well, when you pull cattle forward, that does two things. One, pulls cattle forward out of a marketing period, and two, you're going to sell them at a lighter weight, so you're putting less tonnage on the market, all of which is really great for the market. We thought it was going to be so horrible last August and September, and we kind of walked right through that. I think that opportunity is there again, but we'll see. We in eastern Nebraska have had a really fortunate, the winter's been long, but we were fortunate because if you were north of 92, you just got beaten to death with snow and terrible storms, and we got really lucky here. So my cattle are probably in better shape of the guys in northeast Nebraska, maybe even some of the guys in western Nebraska. So maybe their marketings, they're going to have a little trouble pulling cattle forward. I'm going to be able to pull cattle forward. Kansas is going to be able to pull cattle forward. So hopefully that lends to not making this thing as bad as some people think it's going to be.
Due to the possibility of declining prices, we asked Mike for his current advice on marketing cattle.
I think as far as marketing cattle, market them as quick as they're ready, because I don't think these prices in the mid-120s are going to stay here. I think we're going to get back down into the teens, and when it gets really bad, probably see 110. And I know those cattle won't make money there. These cattle will make money in these mid-120s, and I think you just got to keep marketing cattle as soon as they're ready.
Next week, DTN's Todd Holtman will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. The latest USDA Progress report indicates 2% of the U.S. soybean crop has been planted. For Nebraska, farmers have planted 1% of their soybean crop, just 2% below as of last year. Although weather conditions have not been ideal for early soybean planting, survey data from both irrigated and non-irrigated soybean fields discovered the planting date to be the most stable management factor for enhancing soybean yield. We talked with UNL Emeritus Professor of Agronomy and Horticulture, Jim Specht, on Wednesday to learn why farmers should consider planting their soybean crop sooner.
Well, in research that we did in Nebraska, we found that there was about a quarter bushel to 5/8 of a bushel decline in yield for every day after May 1 you don't have soybeans in the ground.
According to Jim's recent CropWatch article titled Amplifying Positive Impacts of Early Soybean Planting, one of the advantages of early soybean planting in Nebraska is allowing your crop to have access to early spring radiation. If soybean planting is delayed beyond April 30th, the crop lacks this access of radiation.
Well, the research that we've done in Nebraska shows this particular chart of early May, mid-May, late May, and mid-June, how long it took the plants to go from planting date to what we call harvest maturity, which is R8. And you can see in this chart here that you're running short in the of days to grow in the last planting date. Plus, you're not taking advantage of the light that's available early in the season. When you plant on May 1, you get all that daylight before the summer solstice increases, so when you're using it.
Access to early spring radiation is important, but another factor that helps increase yield production is looking at specific variety performance for varieties adapted for your area rather than selecting a specific maturity group.
Well, in most areas in the state, farmers would look at the range of maturity groups they can use for adaptation. And planting early gives you a little bit more lee room at the beginning, at the end, to have a little longer maturity group. But within the range of varieties you grow, you should probably choose the one that has the best performance over time in a trial near you.
We further asked Jim if there was a difference between irrigated and non-irrigated environments when considering maturity groups.
Yes, there were. In fact, in a survey that we did with soybean producers across the state, the irrigated producers tended to use maturity groups that were 0.2 units earlier compared to the rain-fed producers. So we think that has something to do with rain-fed areas suffering drought more frequently and hastening their maturity.
In addition to performance and maturity, it is also important to focus on proven yield performance in your region.
Yield is important for obvious reasons, and you should really, when you choose your varieties within your range of maturity groups, choose the one that has the best yield performance, and you can do some of these tests on your own farm to find that out.
Although Jim recommends growers plant soybeans early, there are some factors that can delay the planting date.
Well, like this year, it's been cold and wet, so farmers have delayed their corn planting, which for farmers that only have one planter, this delays their soybean planting too. But we would urge people to try as early as they can to get their soybeans in, because it does make a difference in yield and adds up. A half bushel a day, it adds up.
For growers who would like to compare their results based on maturity group differences with early planting dates in both irrigated and non-irrigated land, Jim recommends they use the Nebraska On-Farm Research protocols.
Yes, there's a Nebraska On-Farm website that's directed by Laura Thompson, and Jenny Reese at York has offered a protocol that producers can use to use their on-farm test sites and help with the University Extension group to decide whether an early or a later maturity group will work for them in early planting scenarios.
You can learn more about the benefits of planting soybeans early by looking up Jim Specht's recent CropWatch article at cropwatch.unl.edu. As we mentioned in our previous episode of Market Journal, ethanol has many benefits when it comes to reducing pollution. According to Roger Berry, Nebraska Corn Board's Director of Market Development, ethanol not only makes the air safer and healthier, but also saves him money at the pump. We spoke with Roger at the Nebraska Ethanol Board's Emerging Issues Forum and began by asking him about the progress of ethanol in Nebraska.
You know, it's really an amazing story of what we're seeing with ethanol. You know, ethanol has a long history in Nebraska, and Todd Sneller of the Ethanol Board he's the one who can really tell you a lot about the history of ethanol in Nebraska and has seen that growth that's going on. But let's just go back for a few years here, say to the beginning of the renewable fuel standard back in 2005 and 2007, in that time era. We really didn't see much for ethanol in the state prior to that. Once the renewable fuel standard came in and it was required to start having 10% ethanol in our fuel is when things really started to take off. And since that time, we have just seen a tremendous amount of growth in even higher blends of ethanol. Of course, E10, we don't even think about E10 anymore. We pull up, we pick up the nozzle, we put it in our car, and 98% of the time, or 98% of the fuel, I guess I should say, that we put into our cars has that E10 in it. Now we're starting to hear about higher blends of ethanol, E15, E30, E85, and we're seeing those blends be utilized just so much more in the state because people are starting to figure out that, whoa, this is a better fuel and it's costing me less money.
Nebraska is the nation's second largest ethanol producer by producing more than 2.1 billion gallons annually. In addition, the ethanol industry also employs more than 1,300 people and contributes $5 billion to Nebraska's economy. With this information, we further asked Roger about the international aspect of ethanol with Nebraska's corn producers.
The economic impact on the state of Nebraska with ethanol is huge. Say we lost ethanol in the state of Nebraska. we would have a lot of our rural communities simply dry up and blow away. I mean, I know we have that problem anyhow with rural communities decreasing in population, but we would see that accelerated many times over if we lost our ethanol, because it gives such a great market to the corn producers so that those corn producers can stay on the farm and continue to feed that economic activity into the local communities.
According to American Ethanol, Nebraska's 25 ethanol plants consume 750 million bushels of corn and produce 6.4 million tons of distillers' grain annually. In order to help support the local workforce, it is important to remember that E10 gasoline is approved under warranty by every automaker in the world. In addition, the EPA approves the usage of gasoline that is 15% to 85% ethanol in all gasoline-powered vehicles 2001 and newer. Even higher blends such as E30, E40, and E85 are also approved for flex fuel vehicles.
And we often hear people say, oh gosh, even though I drive a flex fuel vehicle, I'm afraid to put it in there. It might hurt my vehicle. It's made for that fuel. So you can be rest assured, you can put up to E85 and any mix in between into that flex fuel vehicle. But let's talk about E15, because E15, although it can be used in a flex fuel vehicle, can also be used in any vehicle 2001 or newer. So that's 90% of the cars on the road today, maybe even more than 90% anymore. And a lot of people don't realize that. When you pull up to a pump and if you pull into a station that has E15, you're going to see E15 is normally about 5 cents cheaper than what normal unleaded, what we call unleaded would be. If you drive a car that's 2001 or newer, and if you're not using E15, you're just having money taken out of your pocket. And I don't know about you, but I like to keep that money in my pocket. So I use the E15 in my 2001 newer car any chance that I can get.
By using the highest ethanol blended gasoline available for your vehicle, one will not only benefit the local workforce and save money, but will also help reduce pollution.
Every time you use a fuel that has a higher blend of ethanol in it, you are cutting down on that pollution that you're putting into the air. I like to use those higher blends of fuel in my car, and every time I pull up to a stoplight, I look at the car beside me and I think, my car's burning cleaner than your car is. And that's what it's going to take us for all of us doing our part where we can with the vehicles that we have. You know, if it's 2001 or newer, use that E15. You're contributing to cleaner air, and we all like to breathe a little bit easier, and that's what ethanol does.
Next week, Tim Ott will discuss how the company Greenyug is converting bioethanol into higher value chemicals. For a seed cost between $25 and $31 per acre, livestock producers can benefit from planting cool season annuals in the spring or fall. These cool season annuals can allow producers to gain valuable grazing days or hay. According to Dennis Bauer, Nebraska Extension Emeritus educator, all kinds of annuals can be planted in the spring. At a recent Beef Profit Tips meeting, Bauer said legumes all create great grazing or hay options. You can learn more about a few of these forage options, their economics and yield potential in the April Nebraska Farmer. A USDA report titled A Life Cycle Analysis of Greenhouse Gas Emissions of Corn-Based Ethanol states that greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production of corn-based ethanol in the United States are about 43% lower than gasoline. Corn ethanol and gasoline blends can also reduce tailpipe emissions of significant pollutants. To learn more about how ethanol can reduce both greenhouse gas and tailpipe emissions in the U.S. and other foreign countries, we met with Dr. Steffen Mueller, Principal Economist of the University of Illinois at Chicago, and began by asking him about the environmental benefits of ethanol.
The environmental benefits, focusing on the environmental benefits, the two major groups. One is the greenhouse gas emissions that we assess with models called life cycle assessments. And the second benefit is tailpipe pollutant reductions. So tailpipe pollutant reductions are particularly important for high polluted areas, lots of vehicle traffic, lots of gasoline combustion. So ethanol as a mix into the gasoline blend can reduce the emissions from the tailpipes.
According to Steffen, there are air emissions released from ethanol. However, they are all due to the manufacturing process, including the amount of fuel that is consumed by a tractor to grow corn and the amount of energy needed at a corn ethanol plant. These air emissions components are included in the life cycle analysis of ethanol and derive the final CO2 emissions from all of the individual recorded subcomponents. Although ethanol does contain these air emissions, it is still a safer option for the environment.
Biofuels have a large advantage over gasoline from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective, because as the corn grows, it absorbs carbon, and when you combust it in an engine, it re-releases that carbon in the atmosphere. So that's what's called a carbon neutral process, right? Absorption of the carbon from the atmosphere during plant growth, re-released during combustion, carbon neutral process. Because the carbon in the fuel from a biofuels is carbon neutral, we have a significant advantage over gasoline, right? So in gasoline, the carbon in the fuel is a fossil-derived carbon, and then it's a net addition to the atmosphere, right? It has never been absorbed or re-released. I mean, it's been absorbed like millions of years ago, and it's now re-released, but it constitutes a net addition. Also, like the refinery emissions and the emissions from extracting the crude oil are also added into a gasoline's life cycle analysis, right? If we add it all up and we add the fossil carbon to it, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with fossil fuels, with gasoline, are significantly higher than those of currently produced modern biofuels such as ethanol.
To continue research on tailpipe and greenhouse gas emissions, Steffen was able to participate and present data at U.S. Greens Council organized workshops in Japan, India, Mexico, Korea, and Colombia. According to Steffen, his 5-city study concluded that international markets have the opportunity to extremely benefit from U.S.-produced corn ethanol by blending either 10 or 20% ethanol in their fuel supply. Corn ethanol's greenhouse gas reductions allows international markets to comply with Paris climate agreements, and its tailpipe emissions reductions help global polluted cities to clean up air emissions. For the U.S., Steffen says the Clean Air Act has shown great success with the help of 10% ethanol.
In the United States, coming back to your question, we've seen ethanol being part of the success stories in cleaning up our air emissions. As we look to foreign cities, then we can recommend to those cities that they learn from our experience, and we can provide them with the data to show them what we've done in the US, and then we can do some specific modeling for these cities, for these areas, to show them just how effective a program would be, right? Based on those cities' vehicle population, based on the country's refinery makeup, oil refinery makeup, and so that's part of that study.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. And during this last week, of course, we dealt with a storm system last weekend that hit western Nebraska and then slid through on Sunday to catch southern Nebraska with some very light rainfall. Then we had another impulse move across the central plains Monday night into Tuesday, primarily seeing some significant moisture in locations in southwest, south central Nebraska between 1/2 inch and 1 inch in some locations. And then that slowly dissipated as it moved toward the east. We did see some light precipitation, but nothing extraordinary. And unfortunately, this lack of moisture with all of these events is starting to add up. And if we go to the current drought monitor that was released on Thursday morning, you will notice that we are starting to see some abnormally dry conditions being expanded toward the north and northeast. And primarily this is a function of the last 60 days. Although we've been getting a lot of precipitation events, they've been meager at most, and we're still looking at some record dry precipitation totals in portions of eastern Nebraska, along with record April cold. So the concern with that expansion of dryness is there, coming from the southern plains moving northward. We're not basically worried too much yet about the drought, but we would like to see some significant moisture to help alleviate some of these deficits that have built up over the last 60 days. So as we go to the upper air models, what we'll notice for this weekend is excellent planting weather. We have a ridge in place with a trough to the east and west of us. Very warm conditions expected this entire week, and we should be well into the 70s and possibly low 80s across southern Nebraska, with high pressure firmly in control, southerly flow along the backside of this high pressure, bringing up copious moisture into the region. So we do see some potential for some scattered shower activity over the southern Rockies as this trough starts to make its way in on Sunday. We'll start to see some energy shooting out from that trough into toward the central plains. series of low pressure systems located along the lee sides of the Rocky Mountains. The low pressure system up in the northern plains will give us the better shot of moisture with some scattered moisture in the southern portion of the plains region. And as we get into Monday, this trough begins to make its way toward the east, so we have low pressure firmly in control. I suspect we'll see some severe weather outbreak developing on Monday across the midsection of the country. We do show some scattered thunderstorm activity. Some of this down in the central plains may become severe, especially as we go into Tuesday. As the northern stream trough breaks away from the southern stream, moves toward the Great Lakes, we get a series of lows down in Texas and toward the southwest that will help pump moisture up into the central plains. Some of that moisture interacting with the northern phase. Of course, we get the thunderstorm activity. Another line of thunderstorms develops and possibly hitting southeast Nebraska with severe weather. And then we really see the separation as we get into Wednesday as that trough hangs back in the southern plains. So we are going to see those low pressure systems at the surface continue to pump moisture into the region. Widespread convective outbreak possibly moving up into southeastern Nebraska as we go into Wednesday. And then as Thursday, the Great Lakes trough moves to the east. The southern plains trough starts to break apart. And of course, no, this doesn't mean snow. We had a computer glitch with the model, so we don't have the surface pressures, but we do basically have a low pressure system that was depicted here in the southern plain or southern Mississippi Valley, which will throw a tremendous volume of precipitation into the eastern Corn Belt. And then as we get into Friday, that trough moves to the east, bringing cool air to the Great Lakes, but high pressure firmly in control, and looks like another extended period here in the central United States where we could see some decent planting weather, particularly as we go in from Saturday through the following Tuesday as the heavy precipitation moves off into the southeastern United States. So the 8 to 14-day forecast shows a brief bit of cooling behind that trough. I think this is overplayed to some extent. I think we'll be more into the warmer sector. And in terms of precipitation, I think we're probably seeing this drier conditions drop a little bit farther south and this moisture moving a little bit more to the east than is currently depicted. But overall, at least we have a respectable chance of some shower activity next week with the potential for some scattered severe weather breaking out across the central plains.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on cattle prices, benefits of early soybean planting dates, Nebraska's progress of ethanol, and ethanol air emissions. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next week, Todd Holtman will look at corn and soybean markets, and Tim Ott will discuss how ethyl acetate is going commercial. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Bridget Nelson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.